Welcome to the Valley Politics History Interviews. I'm Terry Christensen. Frank Fiscalini has been a fixture in San Jose politics for over half a century, bridging old and new San Jose. From 1956 to 1985, he was superintendent of the East Side Union High School District, and he was known then as the godfather of East Side politics. In 1990, he ran for mayor and lost to Susan Hammer, but he came back to win election to the city council in 1992 and served 2 terms there. We aired our interview with Frank Fiscalini in 2 parts in 2016. Now, here it is in full. So Frank Fiscalini, longtime superintendent of schools, hospital executive, community leader for many good causes, candidate for mayor, San Jose City Council for 2 terms. What have you been doing since you retired from all that?
Well, it's kind of interesting, Terry. When I retired from the council, I was approached by one of my former students at James Lake High School, Ed Alvarez. And Ed at that time had formed a company here, Silicon Valley Advisors. It was a group that was involved in doing land use lobbying and research. And he asked me if I would be interested in joining them. And I couldn't say no. He was student body president, by the way, when I was principal at James Lake High School. So
this is the 1950s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We had a long association. So I spent about 5 years there. And then my wife became ill. So I spent about the next 6 years taking care of her. And when she passed, I decided that I really couldn't stay inactive. So I started to do volunteer work again. I went back on the board of Opera San Jose.
Opera San Jose, that's
Yes,
a great one.
It is. Yeah. And I was with Irene when we started the company, and been through all the growth pains with it,
Right.
and see it where it is today, and appreciate how far we've come. It's a real thrill. I miss Irene terribly because we were really dear friends. And then I serve on Silicon Valley Faces, which is the successor to the old National Conference of Christians and Jews.
Oh, right.
We have some very, very fine educational programs that we do there, and I'm really delighted with the results, and continue to spend time and some treasure there, which I think is important. I'm on a committee at the History San Jose Museum. I enjoy that because I'm a history buff by trade, really, and I serve on a board of Child Development Inc., which is a company that operates child care centers.
Okay, so you're not retired at all, you're just not paid.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Well, those are all really good causes. I want to go back to the 60s with you. You became a superintendent of East Side Union High School District, a huge district, at a very young age, and served for a very long time, 1956 to 1982, I think.
Yes.
Which is extraordinary. Superintendents don't do that anymore.
No.
But there was a blip in your service when the Board of Trustees fired you.
Yep.
So tell us what happened next.
Well, there was a blip, and it was kind of interesting because I had a 4-year contract at the time, and I think the board had a dilemma on its hands. They didn't know whether they were going to have to pay me off, whether I would do something else with respect to the action. So they put me on leave and paid me. The nice part about all of that experience, at least for me, is that the teachers rose up in my defense. Community rose up in my defense. The leadership of the Teachers Association and members of the community came together, formed a committee, filed for recall, ultimately recalled several of the board members that were involved in my termination. And a few months later, I was back on the job. And it was, in many respects, Terry, a very perplexing time for me because I could not understand what happened, why. To this day, I really don't understand why. Quite honestly, until you raised the question with me, I hadn't really thought much about it. I just considered it, quite honestly, part of my growth experience. And I think it was a good one because you learn a lot of things, and I think it ultimately made me a better superintendent.
Well, it also gave you a reputation as somebody with considerable power in San Jose. And I know in the 70s when I came to town, people were thinking of you as the godfather of East Side politics, because you advised candidates and helped encourage people to run. Was that a fair assessment? Were you the godfather of East Side politics?
I don't know whether I was the godfather or not, but I've heard that appellation before.
Yeah.
And but I did get involved. I believe that the leader, in this case of a school district, had an obligation to be representative of the people that he worked for. We were growing very rapidly in those days,
Yeah.
as you'll recall. So it was just a constant process of building schools, hiring teachers, developing curriculum, improving programs, all of the things that you become involved with. And as a result of that, I became involved in external affairs much more really than I would think the normal superintendent would have had done in those days, and maybe even today. I spent a great deal of time in Sacramento lobbying on behalf of the district, seeking more funds for construction purposes, particularly because of the growth. I did a lot of lobbying the city of San Jose, particularly in the arena of low-cost housing. I can remember times
We
when...
need you to do some more work on that.
Yes, well, you're probably right, but I spent countless hours trying to convince the council not to place all the low-cost housing in East San Jose.
Yeah, which they did.
That they would rue the day that they did that, and that's come to pass.
Yes.
And my lobbying was for naught, but my intent was, I think, noble and purposeful. It's still true today, Terry.
Yeah.
And until we can provide the appropriate assimilation, we're going to continue to have the kinds of issues that face us.
Did you also encourage candidates,
Oh, yes.
people to run for office? Who are some of the-
Particularly for school board.
for school board, yeah.
Again, there was a time when I probably was a little more bold than I might be today in encouraging people. I was particularly concerned because of our growing minority population in the district, that we needed minority board members. And I was successful in securing Richard Tanaka to serve. He served for a long period of time on the board. Ed Alvarez served on the board, Jose Martinez, Yaya Martinez, and they all made contributions, and I'm very proud of that, because it really helped set an example, I think, for young people in the district to look up to these folks to say, yes, si se puede, I can do this, and one day I can look to have the same ambition.
Well, something else that was going on there, were you part of the group of civic leaders that encouraged the revival of the Fiesta de las Rosas?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yes. So the Fiesta started in the 1920s, and it was a very big deal in San Jose. Faded out during the Depression, I guess.
Yes, it did.
And it was a celebration mainly of the Spanish heritage of California and San Jose. It was revived in '69, and it, what should I say, it ended in tears.
It ended, yes.
From tear gas, I think.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
What happened?
Well, Mary Jane Sauerwein was the person who led the effort to bring back the Fiesta. It really was in its day a rival to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
And a group of us felt that really we ought to bring it back to San Jose because it was important in the early history of our city, and we needed to really have a celebration that could speak to the heritage of the city and to its growth. So we put together a committee and proceeded to plan the parade. Lauren Green was our grand
From
marshal.
Bonanza, yeah.
And we had a parade, but we also had a number of Latino activists that protested. And unfortunately, the protest got out of hand. As I've reflected on it, and I have quite a lot since that time, I think we made a mistake. Had we involved some of the Latino leadership, we had some Latino people on our committee, but apparently not the ones that were satisfactory.
Well, that was a big time of the rise of
yeah,
Latino,
exactly.
the Chicano movement in San Jose, farm workers movement, so it was very rapidly changing time.
And it was a mistake on our part. I think had we done that,
Yeah.
and they felt ownership we may still have that parade today.
Yeah.
But we didn't.
And it could be a big source of civic pride,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
didn't work out that time.
Yeah, and it was a mistake.
Yeah.
And it was unfortunate. Because it's an awful lot of work, I can tell you that.
But I think it was an awakening for the city, for the Latino and Chicano population, as they asserted themselves, and for the city in general to recognize this is a real force.
And the
in
interesting part of all of that, Terry, is that subsequent to that time, I always had very good relationships with those leaders. I can remember, quite honestly, working with Cesar when Cesar Chavez, when he was young, starting out here, active. I was also very active in the old San Jose Community Foundation, which was the forerunner of starting Moxa, for example.
Yeah.
That was one of our projects. We got them started. And so even in spite of the fact that we weren't able to carry on the parade and it didn't end on a very happy note, for at least personally for me, it resulted, I think, in some stronger relationships rather than weaker ones.
Something else you did was help renovate our beautiful Cathedral Basilica of St. Joseph's downtown. I understand that was a 5-year effort to get the money to renovate that building. How hard was it to do that?
Well, it was very difficult. I didn't spend the full 5 years on the project, but I really started it out, got it going, and it was finished really out of the bishop's office. The bishop came to me and asked me if I would help with that project, and it was really an in-between time for me, from election to who knows what, and ultimately it was running for mayor. So I really needed something to fill up my life at that time. So I agreed to do it. And quite honestly, it was a labor of love. The church was in terribly bad shape.
Yeah.
And I had the joy of putting all the pieces together and have such fond memories of that work. I can remember the day that Dan Breeding of Tennisketter and Breeding came into my office, and they had just finished the structural survey and inspection of the church, and he said, "Frank, I've got some bad news." And I said, "Well, what's the problem, Dan?" And he said, one of the main trusses in the church is separated. It's an extremely dangerous condition. If we have a serious earthquake, it's probably going to come down. There are serious fissures in the walls that need to be attended to. Something we really hadn't planned on because of the expense. It was quite expensive. I took the problem to the bishop, and of course, he didn't have much choice. It just had to be done, and they did, and did a fine piece of work of putting that old building back together. And then the interior of it was a lot of fun. A lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. From the organ to all of the artwork in the church. The artist that we employed was Andrei Bozak, Russian, very skilled, did all of the restoration work. It was hard in the sense that money was difficult to raise, and that was...
Well, let me ask you about that, because you've also raised money for the Opera San Jose.
Oh, yeah.
Why do you think it's so hard to raise money in this town? Are
Well,
we cheapskates?
I've asked myself hundreds of times why we can't shake loose some of the new money in this community to take care of the kinds of needs that we have. Yeah, just use the arts as an example. Contrast opera in San Francisco with opera in San Jose.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars are contributed in San Francisco. I can't claim that we receive millions here. I wish we could, because it would be important to the sustenance of the art and for other artworks in our city. I don't know. Maybe the money has to grow old.
Maybe so.
I don't know.
A lot of it doesn't. They don't live in San Jose.
No, they don't.
So, you know, they're not paying attention to this city.
They have a vested interest in San Jose
Yeah.
because most of their workers live here.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
good point.
you know, are able to enjoy the art forms that we have and should be supported.
So Frank, in 1990,
Yes,
you ran for mayor,
yes,
ran against a couple of council members. Ultimately, the runoff was between you and Susan Hammer. Susan Hammer won that election, but barely, by about 1,200 votes. It's the
Right.
closest election for mayor we've ever
Yeah.
had. You look back on that and think, if only I had done this one more thing, what happened?
well, I did then,
You did then.
but I don't
worry
anymore.
about it now.
No, not at all. My assessment at the time was that there were some attacks late in the campaign.
That was one of the first kind of nasty campaigns we had. Yeah.
And I ran out of money, and I just didn't have the money
Yeah.
to respond. And I think it made the difference, quite
Mhm.
honestly. I have never held brief because of that. I accepted the fact that it probably was politics at its worst, and you accept it because you got in the ring. I didn't like it, but I wasn't going to quibble over it. Life goes on, and Susan and I have become, I think, reasonably good friends.
Yeah, you worked with her.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you had your comeback in 1992.
Right?
Ran for city council, District 6, Rose Garden,
Yes.
Willow Glen, and you won. And you were reelected in 96, 8 years on the city council, served with Mayor Hammer, Mayor Gonzalez.
Yes.
What do you think was your greatest achievement during your time on the city council?
Oh, boy.
Choose one.
Oh, it's difficult to choose one because I think I had several that I'm very proud
Well,
of.
You can mention a couple then.
One of them, of course, would be the leadership role that I took in moving City Hall back downtown.
Mm-hmm.
That took
That's big.
6 years of council work,
Yeah.
and finally able to convince the mayor that it's really time that we move, and she did, and we did, and we made it.
Thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I think my work with Santana Row and creating that
Yeah.
reality, that took a lot of work and effort, a lot of controversy.
And that's in your district, or was in your
Yes.
district, yes.
Yes. Not a happy time for the redevelopment agency.
Yeah, it was a
because
tough
they,
one.
They
Yeah.
opposed it.
Yeah.
But I felt that it was important for the city, and that it would ultimately pay dividends, which I think history has proven
Absolutely.
that it has. I'm also very proud of the fact that we built a lot of housing in District 6 when I was in office. As a matter of fact, at one point, we had built more housing in District 6 than all of the other districts
Yeah,
combined.
people wouldn't think that because they think of Willow Glen and
It was
Rose
built
Garden as
out.
being
No,
fully
no,
developed.
There are plenty of other area in
Yeah.
the district that we did build out, and so I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the staff I had. Very committed, very responsive.
Well, a few of them were students
Yes,
of mine,
they
so
were.
there you go.
They were, and I had the joy of encouraging some of them to go on,
Yeah.
and they've gotten their master's
Yeah,
degrees, and
yeah. Doing
I'm
good
very
stuff.
proud of them, and they're working in government today
Mhm.
and doing quite well. But they helped me be very responsive to the community, and I think we were. We were the first to have a district office. I had a little district office in Willow Glen that I staffed one day a week, and I was there periodically on schedule, and it gave chance for people to drop in, which they did,
Yeah.
and talk about their problems, or just to talk. Many of them just like to come in and visit, and which was fine.
What about your biggest disappointment during those years?
Easily my biggest one.
Yeah.
My inability to convince VTA or the redevelopment agency to extend the light rail to Santana Row. I think it was a huge mistake not to.
A lot of people are still talking about that. Yeah.
Well, it still
Yeah.
needs to be linked to
Yeah.
downtown, ultimately to Cupertino, because of the tremendous growth that's
Of
going
course,
to
we need
occur.
to go east too.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, it should.
Yeah.
It should go out at Santa Clara and Alum Rock, and I've always believed that the line really should have gone down San Carlos, all the way to Santana, over Bascom, past Valley Medical, where thousands of people are being served. It was more convenient to use an existing line, cheaper to use an existing line, and I suppose that's why they decided to do it, but I was disappointed.
That's a big one.
I was disappointed.
Well, Frank, that's quite a career in public service. As we close, I wonder what your advice would be to other retirees like you and me, or to young people who are thinking about doing some community service. What's your advice?
Oh, be involved, be active, keep the mind turning. Don't become complacent or lazy with yourself. And I think for young people, I would encourage them to take an interest in politics. Become involved, become knowledgeable. And one of the best ways of doing that is to do some volunteer work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and whether it's really in a local community, it may be a school board that you want to serve to begin with. It could be city politics, one of the committees of the city or the commissions. Get involved, learn about our community, grasp the history so that really one of these days, if you decide that, yes, I want to become involved in politics, you'll have some background from which to work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's terribly important. I would just want to encourage you and all others and myself really to continue to learn.
Yes.
I think that's terribly important.
That's great. Thank you very much, Frank.
Oh, you're very
Great
welcome,
to have you
Terry.
with us today.
It's great to see you.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
For other interviews with the leaders and activists who shaped the history of San Jose and Santa Clara County, look for the Valley Politics History Interviews on YouTube. I'm Terry Christensen. Thanks for watching.